Tonight I return with another collection of disturbing accounts pulled from the darker corners of Canada, where quiet streets, empty highways, and frozen wilderness hide secrets that were never meant to surface. In this episode, we will explore 8 of the most unsettling cases ever whispered about in hushed tones across the provinces, from small towns that swear something inhuman walks their tree lines, to cities where a single decision on a winter night changed lives forever. These stories are drawn from testimonies, police reports, local rumors, and surviving witnesses whose memories refuse to fade, even when everyone around them has tried to move on. Every narrative has been rebuilt with care and respect, shaped from fragments of real fear, documented incidents, and the voices of those who still live with the aftermath. For their safety and privacy, certain names, locations, and identifying details have been altered, but the core of what happened remains as close to the truth as it can be told. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Files for daily true crime content that will keep you awake long after the video ends, and hit the notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. There are nights when I still find myself staring at the rearview mirror longer than I should, searching the darkness for something I do not have the words to explain. People assume that after enough time, the mind files trauma away in a cabinet somewhere deep and unreachable. Mine never did. Not after that winter in northern Ontario, and not after the figure I saw on the side of that highway refused to stay where it belonged. My name is Oliver, and to most people, I'm simply the guy at work who hates driving after dark. I plan my shifts around daylight, make excuses when someone suggests a late-night road trip, and I will walk home in a snowstorm before I agree to be the last one leaving the parking lot. If anyone asks, I say I am just cautious. There is no way to explain that I am actually afraid of something I saw for only a few seconds years ago, on a stretch of road most people never think about twice. Back then, I was 24, working the closing shift at a gas station off the Trans-Canada Highway. It was the kind of job you take when you do not have many other options and you tell yourself it is temporary, even when you know it might not be. Winters up there are not just cold, they are heavy. The snow piles against storefronts and telephone poles like it is trying to swallow them whole. The sky turns the color of old bruises by mid-afternoon, and the temperature drops in a way that makes the air feel personal, like it is punishing you for stepping outside. That night had already started badly. A delivery truck was late, my manager had called in sick, and I had stayed an extra 2 hours to cover without being asked. By the time I locked up, it was past 1 a.m. The world outside the gas station glass was silent and frozen, the parking lot covered in a thin layer of packed snow with tire tracks etched into it like scars. I brushed the snow from my car, started the engine, and let the heater sputter to life. My route home was simple, 15 minutes along a 2-lane highway that cut through a forest before looping back toward town. I had driven it hundreds of times. The road had no streetlights, just reflective markers and the weak glow of my headlights pushing against an endless black wall of trees. I remember the first few minutes of that drive so clearly because they were painfully normal. The radio murmured low in the background. My breath fogged faintly on the windshield before the heater caught up. Ice cracked under my tires whenever I changed lanes to avoid the worst ruts. The snowbanks on either side rose in uneven ridges, and beyond them the tree line swallowed everything. I was 10 minutes from home when I saw the figure. At first it was nothing more than a shape on the shoulder, a darker smudge against the snow about 50 meters ahead. I squinted, thinking it might be a snowmobile someone had left half buried, or maybe a deer standing too close to the road. But as my car drew closer, the shape resolved into something unmistakably human. There was someone standing on the side of the highway, alone, in the middle of the night, with no car in sight and no houses for several kilometers in either direction. I eased off the gas, my foot hovering over the brake. The beam of my headlights rolled over the figure, and I felt every hair on my arm stand up under my jacket. It was a man, or at least it looked like one. Tall, thin, facing the tree line instead of the road. He stood rigid, his back half turned to me, arms hanging loosely at his sides. He was wearing something dark that blended into the night, but his skin, what I could see of it, looked pale against the snow. There was something wrong about the way he was standing. His shoulders seemed too narrow for his height. His neck stretched just a little too far forward, as if his head were being pulled toward the trees. I slowed to nearly a crawl. My brain scrambled for simple explanations. Maybe his car had broken down and he had started walking. Maybe he was drunk and had wandered out here by accident. Maybe he was hurt. People freeze to death up here because others mind their own business. That is what I told myself as I rolled past him. As my car pulled alongside, I turned my head for a better look. He did not turn to meet my gaze. He did not look at the car at all. His face was angled toward the forest, chin lifted slightly as if he were straining to hear something deep between the trees. I could see the edge of his cheek, the curve of his jaw. His skin was too smooth and too pale, like wax left in the cold. No hat, no gloves, just dark clothing and exposed skin in sub-zero wind. The other thing that struck me in a way I did not understand until later was his posture. People waiting for help or stranded on the roadside carry their weight like they are ready to flag someone down. They pace, they shuffle, they hug themselves for warmth. This man stood perfectly still, his arms just a fraction too far from his sides, fingers slightly spread like he was posing, like he had been placed there. My foot pressed down on the brake almost without my consent. The car slowed, tires crunching on the thin snow. I told myself I could not just leave him. If he froze to death and I read about it in the paper the next morning, I would never forgive myself. The guilt would be worse than a few minutes of discomfort and an awkward conversation. I pulled onto the shoulder a few meters ahead of him and stopped. The headlights washed the road in white, and the red glow of my taillights painted the snow behind me in faint, bloody color. For a second, the only sound was the tick of the cooling engine and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I reached for the glove box, fingers brushing against the small flashlight I kept there. My hand hesitated. A thin, hushed voice in the back of my mind whispered that I should just keep driving, that something about this was wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the weather or broken down cars. I swallowed hard, shoved the thought down and unbuckled my seatbelt. By the time I looked up, the man was gone. I stared at the side mirror, expecting to see him still standing where he had been a moment ago, but the shoulder was empty. The snowbank sat undisturbed, the tree line a jagged black edge beyond it. I craned my neck, checked the other mirror, twisted around in my seat. Nothing. He could not have gotten far. The snow was deep off the road. I had only looked away for a few seconds. A sick, electric feeling slid coldly down my spine. Maybe he had walked toward the car. The thought came with a rush of adrenaline that made my hands shake. I turned forward again, and my breath caught halfway up my throat. There was a face in the passenger side window. I did not hear footsteps. I did not hear the whisper of snow under shoes or the rattle of the handle. One moment the glass showed nothing but darkness and the faint reflection of my own features. The next, a pale oval surfaced out of the black, pressed close enough that I could see the slight fog of breath against the inside of the window. The man was bent at an angle that did not make sense, as if he had folded himself to peer into the car without bending his knees. His head was tilted, eyes wide and dark, focused directly on me. There was no surprise there, no plea for help, no anger. Just an intense, suffocating curiosity, like a child staring at something they do not understand. His mouth hung slightly open. The corners of his lips were pulled just a bit too far toward his ears, not quite a smile, but not neutral either. In the harsh side spill of my headlights, his skin looked almost colorless, stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. I did not scream. My voice simply refused to work. I jerked back by instinct, shoulder hitting the door, one hand slamming into the steering wheel. My other hand shot for the lock switch, though I could not remember if I had already locked the doors. As my fingers hit the plastic, his expression changed. The curiosity melted into something else, an awareness, a recognition, as if I had failed some kind of test. His eyes narrowed and his head twitched in a series of small, quick motions, like he was trying on different angles to see which one I found most unsettling. Then he moved. It was not the way a person steps away from a window. There was no shifting of weight, no visible turn. One blink he was there, pressed against the glass. The next he was further back, the edge of his face slipping out of the beam of light, his body retreating toward the rear door as if pulled on an invisible track. His limbs seemed to lag behind his torso by a fraction of a second, like his movements had been edited wrong. I jammed the car into drive and stomped the accelerator. The tires spun for a heart-stopping second, then caught, propelling me forward. The car fishtailed, slightly before straightening out. My chest burned, lungs dragging in air like I had been underwater. I did not look in the mirrors for the rest of the drive. I stared straight ahead, white-knuckled on the wheel, the highway unfolding impossibly slowly in front of me. Every shadow in the periphery of the headlights felt like it might peel away from the trees and step into the road. When I finally reached town and rolled into the dim safety of my apartment parking lot, my hands were still shaking so badly that I had to sit in the car for a full minute before I could open the door. The clock on the dashboard told me that the drive had taken the usual amount of time, but it felt like it had stretched into something longer and thinner, like a rubber band pulled to the point of snapping. Inside, I locked my apartment door, then checked it again. I pulled the blinds closed on every window and pushed the couch a few inches in front of the patio door, even though I knew it would not actually stop anyone determined to get in. Sleep did not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pale face pressed against the glass, the way it had appeared, where no one should have been able to stand that quickly. The next morning, I tried to convince myself that I had imagined parts of it, that exhaustion and late hours had twisted a normal, unsettling encounter into something supernatural in my memory. I even drove back along the same stretch of highway on my day off, in full daylight, scanning the shoulders for any sign that he had been there. Tracks, discarded clothing, anything. I found nothing. There were tire marks, sure, and the usual debris that accumulates along roads, but no footprints leading toward the trees, no signs of a car having gone into a ditch. No indication that anyone had been stranded. The snowbanks were smooth, untouched, except for the plow lines. If he had walked away, the snow would have recorded every step like ink on paper. It had not. I told no one. How was I supposed to phrase it? I stopped to help someone last night and they moved like bad footage. I think I saw something pretending to be a person and it was offended when I recognized it. I kept my mouth shut and went back to work, convincing myself that with enough repetition the memory would dull. For a while it almost did. Weeks went by. The ache in my chest when I got into my car after dark became more of a constant pressure than a sharp pain. I started to believe that maybe stress had filled in certain blanks for me, that the uncanny parts were my brain's way of coping with fear in the moment. Then the dashcam footage arrived. I had installed a cheap dashcam months before for insurance purposes, and I had forgotten all about it that night. It recorded in loops, overwriting old footage unless you manually saved it. One afternoon when I was cleaning out the car, I found the SD card on the floor near the passenger seat. On a whim, I took it upstairs and plugged it into my laptop. The video showed what I expected at first. The gas station fading into the rear view, the dark ribbon of highway, the white slash of my headlights pushing into the night. Time stamps crawled by in the corner. At the moment I remembered seeing the figure, I leaned closer to the screen, bracing myself to watch the scene from the outside. The camera captured the shape on the shoulder. A tall, thin silhouette facing the trees. No details, just absence against white. My car slowed as it had that night. I watched the figure slide past the center of the frame as I pulled ahead and onto the shoulder. Then my car stopped. The brake lights glowed faintly red on the snow behind me. The figure on the roadside did not move. There was no sudden blur rushing toward the passenger side, no smear of motion, no pale face slamming against the glass. The figure on the shoulder remained rooted in place, still facing the trees, still motionless. For several seconds, nothing happened. The car idled. The world remained still. Then, without warning, the video glitched. It was small, just a stutter, a skipped frame. The timestamp jumped forward by less than a second. The road and snowbank remained exactly where they had been. But the figure was gone. One frame. There. Next frame. Empty shoulder, smooth snow, unbroken shadows. The hair on the back of my neck lifted. I scrubbed back and forth over that moment, watching the same microsecond hiccup over and over. I checked the file length, the encoding, everything, hoping for some obvious corruption that would explain it. There was none. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, and realized something that made my stomach twist. The footage outside the car did not show him approaching, but the audio inside the car, the tiny microphone built into the dash cam, had picked up the faint muffled sound of my sharp intake of breath at the exact moment I saw his face at the window. A soft, strangled noise of shock. My reaction existed. His approach did not. These days, I avoid that stretch of highway completely. I take the longer route through town, adding 10 extra minutes to my commute, and if anyone comments, I shrug and say I prefer streetlights. That much is true. Sometimes, though, especially in the dead of winter when the world outside is silent and the sky hangs low, I will be sitting at a red light and catch a glimpse of the tree line in my side mirror. Just a narrow line of black trunks and branches, standing too still against the snow. In those moments, a thought slips in before I can stop it. If whatever I saw that night did not have to move in any way that made sense to me to reach my car, then maybe the highway was never the important part. Maybe it was not stranded there, waiting for help. Maybe it was waiting for someone to slow down. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night and look for a door that is not there anymore. My apartment has an open floor plan, no hallway, no shadows for anything to hide in, and yet my eyes still search for that one narrow rectangle of wood at the end of a carpet runner, with the brass knob that never turned. I am 32 years old, but when I close my eyes, I am 14 again, standing barefoot in the dark, listening to something on the other side of that door, breathing in time with me. My name is Beatrice, and I grew up in a modest, split-level house on the outskirts of Calgary. From the street, it looked like every other place on the block. Small front yard, tired siding, a driveway that turned to ice every winter. People talk about haunted mansions, crumbling Victorian homes with turrets and stained glass. My haunting was a beige house with a single-car garage and a basement no one was allowed to enter. The layout was simple. When you walked through the front door, you were greeted by a short staircase going up to the bedrooms and another going down to the basement. Only in our house, the stairs down ended at a solid door that remained locked every hour of every day. No windows, no light bleeding from underneath, no hint of what was on the other side. When I was little, my parents told me the basement was unfinished and dangerous. There were nails, exposed wiring, concrete dust. It was easier to keep the door locked than to trust a curious kid not to wander down and get hurt. I accepted that explanation for a long time, the way children accept gravity and bedtime. The door was part of the house like any other feature, a boundary you did not cross. Things changed when my insomnia started. I have never been a great sleeper, but that winter when I was 14, something in my brain seemed to snap. Nights became long stretches of consciousness broken only by shallow, unsatisfying naps. I would lie in bed for hours, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the hallway thermostat. On the worst nights when the walls felt too close and my thoughts would not stop circling, I would get up and creep into the hallway, careful to avoid the one board that squeaked. The house felt different at 2 a.m., more honest somehow. You notice the subtle groans of settling wood, the way the furnace breathes, the occasional car passing in the distance like a lonely animal. That was when I began to notice the sounds from the basement door. The first time I thought I was imagining it. I was sitting on the top step near the bathroom, chin on my knees, when a faint noise drifted up from below. It was subtle, just a soft scrape, like something heavy being dragged slowly across concrete. I held my breath. It came again, a little louder, followed by what could have been a low murmur or the echo of the house shifting. I told myself it was the furnace or pipes. Everyone says old houses make noises. Only our house was not that old, and the furnace was on the other side of the basement, according to my father. The sound seemed to come from directly behind the locked door. That night I went back to bed and forced myself not to think about it. The next night there was nothing. The night after that, when the digital clock on my bedside table rolled over to 2:13 a.m., the scraping started again. It became a pattern, not every night, but often enough that I began to dread that hour. Sometimes it was scraping. Sometimes it was a faint, rhythmic tapping from somewhere beyond the door, as if someone were absent-mindedly drumming fingers on a tabletop. Occasionally, I heard something that sounded disturbingly like whispering, too muffled to make out words, but unmistakably human in cadence. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe the heater was knocking. Maybe there was a raccoon trapped somewhere in the foundation. I would repeat these explanations to myself in bed like a prayer, but they did not change what I heard. I made the mistake of telling my mother at breakfast one morning, over burnt toast and lukewarm coffee. "Mom, have you ever heard anything from the basement at night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She did not look up from the newspaper. "Like what, honey? Like scraping? Or talking, maybe?" She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You and your imagination, it is just the house. Pipes, furnace, whatever. This place is a box of noises." "It sounds like it is right behind the door," I pressed. She folded the newspaper with a snap and finally looked at me. Her expression was tight, tired. "There is nothing down there you need to worry about, B. You are not sleeping well, that is all. When people are exhausted, they hear things. Trust me." The dismissal stung more than I expected. I nodded and let the subject drop, but the conversation left a sour taste in my mouth. If there was nothing to worry about, why did she sound so defensive? When I tried to bring it up with my father, the reaction was worse. He worked long hours at a warehouse across town and came home smelling like dust and engine oil. One evening, as he sat on the couch half watching a hockey game, I asked if we could open the basement door just to look. I told him that if I saw what was down there, maybe my brain would stop inventing sounds. The change in his face was instant. One moment he was relaxed, a beer resting on his knee. The next, his jaw clenched and his eyes hardened in a way that made me feel like I had overstepped something important. "No," he said. Just that one word, sharp and final. "Why not?" I pushed, anger rising to match my fear. If there is nothing down there, why keep it locked? It is creepy." He muted the TV with a jab of his thumb and turned fully toward me. "Because I said so. That is my house, my basement. You stay out of it." My house, not ours. Mine. The distinction lodged in my chest like a shard of ice. After that, the door was all I could think about. The insomnia worsened. My mind chewed on possibilities during the day and regurgitated them at night. What could he be hiding that required a lock and that kind of reaction? Drugs? Old tax records? Something worse? It occurred to me that I had never seen him carry anything large down those stairs. Never seen him come up from there with boxes or tools. As far as I knew, he went down sometimes when I was at school or asleep, and whatever he did down there stayed down there. One night, about a month after I first heard the scraping, the sounds changed. It was just past 3 a.m. when I woke with my heart pounding, as if I had been startled by a noise in my sleep. For a moment I lay there, disoriented, the darkness of my room pressing in. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate click from the hallway, followed by a slow, drawn-out creak. Someone had tried the basement doorknob. I slid out of bed as quietly as I could, my feet cold against the hardwood. The hallway felt longer than usual, a tunnel leading into deeper shadow. As I stepped out, a faint, metallic rattle reached my ears. It was the knob again, turning back and forth, the latch catching uselessly on the frame thanks to the lock. I inched toward the top of the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to go back to my room and hide under the covers. Instead, I sat down on the top step, barely breathing. From that angle, I could see the bottom half of the basement door and the dim light from the street lamp bleeding through the small window above the front door. The knob jiggled again, more forcefully this time. "Dad?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The rattling stopped. Silence fell so suddenly that it pressed against my eardrums. I leaned forward a little, fingers digging into the edge of the step. My eyes strained, trying to make out movement in the strip of shadow at the bottom of the door. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then very slowly, something scratched the wood from the other side. It was not the dragging scrape I had heard before. This was more precise. A single point, like a fingernail or the tip of a knife, tracing a line down the inside of the door. The sound was soft but clear, a delicate cutting noise that set my teeth on edge. It started at about the height of my chest and moved downward in a straight line, stopping just above the floor. I could see it. Faint pale lines appeared on the surface of the door in front of me, as if whatever was scratching from the inside was leaving the slightest impression. The rational part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe my father was down there and this was all some grotesque joke. Maybe I was sleepwalking and dreaming on the stairs. Maybe I had finally lost my mind from lack of sleep. I squeezed my eyes shut and opened them again. The faint scratch line on the wood was still there. The scratching started again, this time moving horizontally, forming a second line that intersected the first. It was methodical, almost patient. Whatever was on the other side was not trying to claw its way out in a panic, it was drawing something. My throat closed. I pushed myself backward, the stair edge digging into my palms. I did not run. I crawled. Slowly, awkwardly, my eyes never leaving that door until I reached the top of the stairs and could pull myself into the safety of the hallway light. The scratching stopped. I spent the rest of the night in my room with the door locked, my back pressed against it, listening for more sounds. None came. When dawn finally bled into the sky, I dragged myself out to the hallway, every limb heavy with dread. The basement door looked unchanged at first glance, same dull paint, same brass knob. But when I stepped closer, my stomach flipped. On the white surface, at about the level of my face, there was a faint but unmistakable outline of a rectangle, traced in thin, shallow lines. Inside the rectangle were shorter lines like the suggestion of letters that had been partially erased. I stood there, one hand hovering in the air, not quite brave enough to touch it. Behind me, my father's bedroom door opened with a suddenness that made me flinch. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. "Nothing," I said quickly, stepping away. "I thought I heard something last night." He glanced from me to the basement door. For a moment, his eyes locked onto the faint marking. His jaw clenched. Without a word, he walked past me, grabbed a roll of masking tape from the junk drawer in the kitchen and slapped a strip over the area. Then another. Then, as if to seal it further, he took a chair from the kitchen table and wedged it under the knob, angled toward the frame. "We will talk about this later," he muttered and went to make coffee. We never did. The rest of that day unfolded in a fog. I went to school, sat through classes I barely registered, came home to a house that felt permanently off balance. The chair remained under the knob. The tape remained over the marks. No one mentioned it. That night I put in earplugs and turned on a fan to drown out any possible sounds. It worked for a while. For several nights there was nothing. No scraping, no whispering, no shifting metal. Slowly my body seized the opportunity and dragged me into real, deep sleep. For the first time in weeks, when I woke one morning to the smell of paint, I knew something had changed. In the hallway, the basement door had been repainted a slightly brighter white, its surface smooth and unblemished. The tape was gone. The chair had been returned to the kitchen table. For a moment, the neatness of it all made me dizzy. At dinner that evening, my father cleared his throat. "I cleaned up the door," he said, not quite looking at me. "It was getting scuffed. There is nothing down there but storage. I do not want to hear about it again, understood?" I nodded, but inside I did not believe him. The sound of that careful scratching would not leave my head. Years have passed since then. I moved out as soon as I could, to a small apartment that does not have a basement. My parents eventually sold the house to a young couple expecting their first child. I saw the listing online once out of morbid curiosity. The real estate photos showed the kitchen, the living room, the bedrooms, all staged and bright. There were no photos of the basement. I tell myself that whatever was behind that door was just the product of a sleep-deprived mind and a father with secrets that had nothing to do with the supernatural. Maybe he stored something illegal down there. Maybe there was an old injury, an accident, something he could not bear to talk about. Sometimes I almost believe that. And then, on certain nights when my insomnia returns uninvited, I will lie awake in my safe, basement-free apartment and hear it. Not with my ears, but with some deeper part of my memory. The slow, precise scrape of something tracing lines on the inside of a door. The feeling of being watched through layers of wood and paint. That is when the thought comes, quiet and unwelcome. If it was only in my head, why did he repaint the door? My name is Daniel, and there is a moment that replays in my head every time I walk past a bar on game night. It is not the moment the police told me she was dead, or the moment I saw her face on the news. It is the second when I looked at the man in the hockey jersey and decided to mind my own business. This was in a mid-sized city in Quebec, the kind of place that lives and breathes hockey. On game nights, the streets around the arena turn into a river of jerseys, plastic cups, and cigarette smoke. You can smell stale beer and cold exhaust in the air for blocks. I was 23 then, broke, recently single, and clinging to the ritual of watching home games with my friend Mark as if it were the only normal thing in my life. The night it happened, our team had lost in overtime. The bar we were at exploded in a mix of groans and curses, and people started spilling out into the street, voices hoarse from shouting. It was late January, the kind of cold that turns your breath into steam and makes your fingers ache through your gloves. Mark slapped me on the shoulder and laughed. "Come on," he said. "We will hit one more place, then I will walk you to your bus." I should have gone straight home. I remember thinking that. But the thought of standing alone at a bus stop while the loss replayed on every screen in the city sounded worse than another cheap beer and some loud music. So we went. By the time we left the second bar, it was past midnight. The crowd had thinned, but not by much. The sidewalks were still a sea of jerseys and scarves, people stumbling or weaving their way toward cabs, buses, and parked cars. Streetlights cast yellow halos on patches of dirty snow piled along the curb. Our breath hung in the air as we walked, hands in pockets, shoulders hunched against the wind. That was when I saw her. She was maybe mid-20s, a few meters ahead of us on the sidewalk, walking alone. No jacket, just a thin, long-sleeve top with our team's logo and a skirt that was not built for winter. Her bare legs were blotchy and red from the cold. She moved with that loose, unsteady gait that screams drunk even from behind. Every few steps she wobbled and corrected, one hand reaching out to steady herself on invisible furniture. "Someone had a night," Mark muttered, amused. I might not have noticed her for more than a second if it had not been for the man walking just behind her. He wore the same jersey as half the city, hood pulled up, hands tucked into his pockets. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance. Average height, average build, jeans, dark shoes. But he was too close. Not shoulder to shoulder, not far enough back to be a stranger in a crowd. He hovered a step behind her, matching her speed, adjusting when she veered like he was tethered to her by a rope only he could see. "Maybe they are together," I said, more to reassure myself than anything. "If they are, he is a jerk for letting her walk like that without a coat," Mark replied. "But hey, not our business." We kept walking. The street stretched ahead, a long slope toward a bus stop lit by a flickering sign. I watched as the woman staggered again, her heel sliding on a patch of ice. She flailed, arms pinwheeling. For a split second, I thought she was going to fall. The man in the jersey reached out and grabbed her arm. I expected the kind of contact you see between friends. A quick brace, a steadying hand, maybe a laugh. Instead, his fingers closed around her upper arm with a deliberate slowness that made my stomach twist. His grip was too high, just under the shoulder, and his hand did not drop away when she regained her balance. He held on. She turned her head toward him, her face flushed and unfocused. I could not hear what she said, but even from where I walked, I could see the confusion in the way her eyebrows drew together. He leaned in close, his mouth near her ear, and said something that made her stumble again, this time not from ice but from the force of his pull. "Do you see that?" I asked. Mark glanced up, following my gaze. By now, the two of them were a little further ahead, near the mouth of a side street that led away from the main road. "Drunk guy taking his drunk girlfriend home," he said with a shrug. "Happens every night, man." "But what if she is not Daniel?" He stopped walking just long enough to look me in the eye. "Do not go playing hero because you had one beer too many and a guilty conscience. You start accusing random guys of being creeps and you will be the one in trouble." I remember that moment so clearly, the way the cold bit into my cheeks, the way my breath came out in quick little puffs. The woman stumbled again and the man tightened his grip, steering her toward the side street. It was darker there, less crowded. A bus rumbled past us, its brakes squealing, sending a gust of exhaust into the air. I could have ignored Mark. I could have picked up my pace, called out to the woman, asked if she was okay. I could have done anything other than what I actually did. I hesitated. In that hesitation, they turned the corner and disappeared from view. We kept walking. My bus was due in a few minutes and Mark was talking about something, work, a game, a girl, I do not remember. My ears were still tuned to that side street, listening for a shout, a cry, anything. Nothing came. The city hummed along as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I told myself it was fine. That if there was a problem, she would scream. Someone closer would notice. The police would intervene. The world, in my mind, still mostly operated on the assumption that bad things did not happen in front of witnesses without someone doing something. The next morning, her face was on the news. Her name was Elise. She had been found near the riverbank a few kilometers from where we had seen her, half covered in snow, her hair frozen to the ice. The report said the initial assumption was that she had fallen while intoxicated, succumbed to the cold. An accident, tragic but not uncommon during winter in a city that drinks as hard as it celebrates. I watched the segment with a hollow feeling in my chest. They showed a photo of her at some family gathering, smiling brightly, a child on her hip. They showed footage of the river, gray and unforgiving under a slate sky. They did not mention a man in a jersey. They did not mention a side street. I almost convinced myself I could let it go, that I had only seen a snapshot of a longer story I did not understand, and that interfering might have made things worse. But that evening, as I walked past the same bar, the same slope, the same dirty snow, the memory of his hand on her arm would not let me breathe. 2 days later, I went to the police. Sitting in that small interview room with its buzzing fluorescent light and scuffed table, I felt ridiculous. Who was I? Just some guy who saw something on a drunk night out. But the detective across from me listened, pen scratching on a legal pad as I described the way he walked behind her, the way he steered her off the main road. "Can you describe him?" she asked. I tried. Average height, brown hair, I thought, clean-shaven, the jersey with our team logo dark with a white stripe near the bottom. The thing that stuck with me most clearly was not his face, but a thin, pale line of scar tissue on the right side of his neck, just below the jaw. It caught the streetlight when he leaned in to speak to her. The detective underlined that detail. Weeks passed. The city moved on. Elise's death was officially recorded as an accidental drowning. There was talk in local forums about whether enough lighting and patrols existed near the river. People argued about personal responsibility and alcohol consumption. The man in the jersey slipped, in everyone else's mind, into the category of things that never quite happened. Except he did not. Over the next few months, 2 more women were found in similar circumstances, alone, intoxicated, near the river. Each time the story was the same, a tragic accident, warnings about winter safety, reminders to travel in groups. Each time the knot in my stomach tightened. I started walking home instead of taking the bus on game nights just to avoid the feeling of sitting still while the city's streets rolled past unseen. I watched faces in crowds, scanning necklines for scars. Everyone looked suspicious, no one did. The call from the detective came almost a year later. "We picked someone up last night," she said. "Not for what happened to Elise, for another assault, different area. But your description, the scar, it matches." She could not tell me much, but she confirmed this. A man had been arrested after attacking a woman behind a bar several neighborhoods away. She had fought back hard enough to draw attention. When the police pulled him in, they noticed the scar on his neck. When they dug into his history, they found a pattern of arrests in different cities for drunken altercations and misunderstandings that sounded a lot like the beginning of something much worse. "Will you charge him for Elise?" I asked. There was a long pause on the line. "Accidents are hard to reopen," she said carefully. "We are looking at everything again, but I cannot promise anything." When the call ended, I sat in my small kitchen, phone still in my hand, and stared at the window. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and relentless, covering everything in a clean white layer that hid all the old marks beneath. People tell me I did the right thing by coming forward. They say I was brave. They call what happened to Elise a tragedy, as if tragedy is a thing that descends from nowhere and cannot be stopped. But when I close my eyes at night, I do not see courtrooms or news reports or the detective's careful face. I see a woman walking alone in the cold, bare legs trembling, and a man in a jersey one step behind her, hand closing around her arm, and I see myself a few meters back choosing silence. My name is Harriet, and in my family there is one story that always arrives late in the evening, after the dishes are done and the kids are asleep. It starts with my grandfather winning a cabin in a card game and ends with a place that, according to every office and registry I have checked as an adult, has never officially existed. The first time I saw the cabin, I was 9 years old. We were driving through British Columbia in a rusted blue pickup that smelled like gasoline and damp pine needles. My grandfather sat behind the wheel, humming tunelessly, a cigarette wedged in the corner of his mouth. He did not like the radio. He said it made him feel like someone else was steering. The road we took that day did not appear on any map I have ever found. It started as a gravel turnoff from a secondary highway, marked only by a faded wooden post with no name. The trees closed in quickly, forming a tunnel of green and shadow that swallowed the sky. The truck rattled and bounced over potholes, and every now and then my grandfather would mutter something under his breath, as if reciting directions to himself. "Third bend after the split rock," he said once, "more to the windshield than to me. Then over the creek, then left where the stump looks like a man." To a child, the journey felt endless. When the forest finally opened into a small clearing, it felt like surfacing from deep water. The cabin sat at the center, a squat shape of dark wood and a tin roof mottled with rust. A narrow dock jutted into a still black lake that mirrored the sky so perfectly it made me dizzy to look at it. "Here we are," my grandfather said with a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Our little piece of nowhere." I tumbled out of the truck, legs stiff, and inhaled the sharp scent of wet earth and cold water. The air was different there, thicker somehow. Sounds did not carry the way they did in town. The forest ringed the clearing in a dense wall, and even the birds seemed hesitant to cross it. Inside, the cabin was smaller than it looked from the outside. There was a main room with a cracked stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen with a sputtering propane stove, and 2 bedrooms with sagging mattresses that smelled faintly of mildew. The windows were old and wavy, their glass distorting the view of the lake like the surface of the water itself. One feature stood out immediately: the locks. Every door had 2. There was the regular knob with a simple latch, and above it, a heavy deadbolt that looked newer than everything around it. The windows had sliding bolts screwed into the frames. Even the small cabinet under the sink had a hasp and padlock, though my grandfather kept nothing there but cleaning supplies. "Why so many locks?" I asked, running my fingers over the cool metal of the nearest bolt. "Because I like to sleep," he said, ruffling my hair. "And sleeping is easier when you know things are shut. That ought to stay shut." As a kid, I took that as a joke. As an adult, I am not so sure. We spent a week at the cabin that summer. Days were filled with fishing, half-successful attempts at swimming in water that never seemed to warm, and long walks along narrow trails that threaded the forest. Nights were another matter. After dark, the cabin changed. The walls seemed to contract, pulling closer around us. The windows reflected our own faces back at us with just enough delay to make it feel like someone else was standing outside, trying to learn our expressions. The forest, which had felt merely quiet during the day, became a vast, listening thing. On the 3rd night, I woke to the sound of water. At first, I thought it was rain. I lay in my narrow bed, eyes open to the dark, and listened to a steady dripping like a tap left barely open. But the roof above me was dry. The air did not smell like rain. The sound seemed to come from beneath us. I slipped out of bed and padded into the main room. The fireplace was cold. Moonlight bled through the curtains, painting pale stripes on the floor. The dripping grew louder as I approached the corner near the kitchen. There, near the base of the wall, I noticed a small metal ring flush with the floorboards. It was the kind of ring you might use to lift a trap door. I had never seen it before. The floor was usually hidden under a faded rug, but my grandfather must have rolled it up before bed to clean or to air it out. In the silver light, the ring looked almost black, a dark hole punched in the wood. The dripping sound came from just below it. Curiosity overrode fear. I crouched down and wrapped my fingers around the ring. It was cold to the touch. I pulled. The hatch lifted with a reluctant groan, hinges squealing softly. A breath of air rose from the darkness below, damp and earthy. The dripping became clearer, echoing up from what sounded like a partially flooded space. A thin beam of moonlight slipped past me and spilled into the opening, revealing a set of narrow wooden steps leading down into shadow. The walls were rough stone, beaded with moisture. A few steps down, the light was swallowed completely. "Harriet," my grandfather's voice cut through the quiet like a snapped branch. I flinched, nearly letting go of the ring. He stood in the bedroom doorway, face pale in the dim light, eyes locked on the open hatch. "What are you doing?" he asked, calmer now, but with a tension in his shoulders I had never seen before. "I heard water," I said. "I did not know there was a basement." He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took the hatch from my hands, lowering it carefully back into place. The drip of water grew muffled, as if the wood itself were swallowing the sound. He slid the rug back over it with a practiced motion, erasing the evidence that anything had been there at all. "There is no basement," he said, "just a crawl space. It is damp and unsafe. You do not open that door again, understand?" His tone brooked no argument. I nodded and he softened slightly. "Good girl," he said and patted my shoulder. "Some doors are better left alone." We never talked about it again during that trip, but once I knew it was there, I could not forget. At night, lying in bed, I would stare at the doorway to the main room and picture the hidden door in the floor, the narrow steps, the dark, and the dripping. Years passed. We went to the cabin a few more times before my grandfather's health started to fail and the long drives became too much for him. As a teenager, I found other things to occupy my summers: friends, jobs, the allure of city streets. The cabin receded into the background of my life, a strange pocket of memory I rarely visited. It was only after my grandfather died that the cabin returned to the forefront of my mind. We were going through his papers, sorting through bills and keepsakes, when I found the note. It was tucked into a battered envelope labeled simply "Cabin." Inside there was no deed, no bill of sale. Just a yellowed scrap of paper with a name I did not recognize and the words, "Won in a game. No records. Do not ask questions." No records. The phrase stuck to me like burrs. In the months that followed, I tried to find the cabin again, not physically at first, but on paper. I called land registry offices, combed through online databases, and even took time off work to visit a government building where a bored clerk helped me search through old microfiche. There was no listing that matched the description. No plot of land on that lake under my grandfather's name or anyone else's. The road he had taken did not appear on any official map. It was as if the clearing, the dock, the cabin, and whatever lay beneath its floor had never been acknowledged by the province at all. The more dead ends I hit, the more obsessed I became. Finally, I decided that if the cabin did not exist on paper, I would find it the way we used to, by driving. I borrowed my mother's car and headed west, following the old highway as best I could remember. The landmarks I recalled from childhood had shifted or vanished. A gas station had become a strip mall. A thick stand of trees had been cut back to make way for a new development. When I thought I recognized the turnoff, I took it. The gravel road was narrower than I remembered and bumpier. Branches scraped the sides of the car, and more than once I had to stop and move fallen limbs out of the way. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. I half expected to emerge into the familiar clearing at any moment. I did not. Instead, after what felt like far too long, the road dead-ended at a locked metal gate. Beyond it, the forest continued uninterrupted. There was no clearing, no cabin, no lake. A small, weathered sign on the gate. Read, "Crown land, no unauthorized access." I sat there for a long time, engine idling, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn. Maybe time and logging had changed the terrain enough to erase the path. Maybe the cabin had been torn down, swallowed by regrowth. Or maybe a small, irrational part of me whispered, it had never been meant to be found again once my grandfather was gone. I turned around and drove home. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, old and slightly warped with age. It showed the cabin, unmistakably ours, its tin roof brighter, the wood less sagged. The angle of the shot was wrong, though, taken from within the trees, as if someone had been standing just inside the forest line, watching the clearing. On the back, in my grandfather's cramped handwriting, were 3 words. "Locks are for you." No matter how many offices tell me the cabin was never there, no matter how thoroughly the road disappears from maps, I cannot shake the feeling that somewhere around some unmarked bend, that clearing still exists. The lake still lies black and silent. The cabin still sags quietly in the center. And under a faded rug in the main room, there is still a ring in the floor waiting for someone curious enough to pull. My name is Callum, and where I grew up in rural Saskatchewan, we did not talk about monsters. We talked about coyotes, bad winters, busted tractors, and the price of feed. The land taught you to be practical. You fixed what broke, you put animals down when you had to, and you did not waste time being afraid of things that went bump in the night. At least that is what I believed until the year after our dog died. We called him Duke. He was a big, lumbering mutt with more loyalty than brains. The kind of dog that would chase anything that moved and then come trotting back like he expected a medal for it. He slept on the porch, patrolled the fence line, and barked at every truck that pulled into the yard as if he were personally responsible for border security. When Duke got old, it happened fast. One fall, he was still chasing rabbits. By the next spring, he struggled to stand. My father tried not to show it, but the day we buried Duke under the windbreak, something in him sank a little deeper into his shoulders. After that, the nights felt different. The farm was quieter, too quiet. "We will get another dog," my mother said, but weeks went by and we never did. Money was tight, time was tighter. My dad said it was not the right moment to train a new idiot, and that was that. It was early winter when the animals started acting strange. It began with the cattle. Usually they were stubborn but predictable, plodding out to the far pasture during the day and drifting back toward the barn at dusk. One evening I was trying to herd them in when I noticed they were all avoiding the far corner of the field, the one closest to the tree line. They would graze right up to an invisible line and then stop, heads up, ears twitching, eyes fixed on something I could not see. No amount of shouting or waving my arms would push them past that point. When I walked over there myself, the hair on my arms rose under my jacket. The air felt wrong, heavy. The smell of the snow and dirt shifted into something sharper, like copper and wet fur. "Probably coyotes," my father said when I told him. "They can spook a herd." "Duke never let coyotes get that close," I muttered. He shot me a look. "Duke is gone. Fence is still there. Rifle is still in the cabinet. Use what you have." I tried. The next few nights, I took the spotlight and the old 22 and walked the perimeter, scanning the darkness for eyeshine. Coyotes have a certain way of moving, skittish, darting shapes at the edge of the light. You can feel them even when you cannot see them. Whatever was out there did not move like that. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just a trick of the beam. I swung the light across the field and caught a glimpse of something pale and low to the ground near the fence line. It was larger than a coyote, about the size of a small deer, but the proportions were off. Its back was too flat, its legs too long and jointed at angles that made my brain stutter. By the time I jerked the light back, it was gone. I told myself it had been a calf, or a shadow, or fatigue. Nothing more. But the feeling of being watched followed me all the way back to the house, needling between my shoulder blades like cold rain. A week later, we found the first carcass. It was one of the younger cows lying near that same corner of the field. At first, I thought it had slipped on the ice and broken something. But when we rolled it over, my stomach lurched. Something had opened it up with surgical precision. There was no tearing, no claw marks, no ragged edges like you see when a coyote pack gets bold. The skin around the wound had been peeled back in a clean, smooth line as if cut with a knife. The organs inside were missing in a way no scavenger would bother with. There was barely any blood in the snow. My father's face went gray. "Get back to the house," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking. "Was it a person?" I asked. "Some kind of sick." "Back to the house, Callum." We called the RCMP. An officer came out, took a few photos, and suggested it was probably coyotes or maybe a bigger predator passing through. When my father pointed out the lack of tracks around the body, the officer shrugged and said wind and drifting snow could cover a lot overnight. After he left, my father went into the house, opened the gun cabinet, and took out the rifle he used only for serious things. He loaded it carefully, staring out the window toward the field. "We are not telling your mother the details," he said. "No point in making her afraid of her own yard." "What do you think it was?" I asked. He did not answer. That night, he set a chair near the back door and sat there with the rifle across his lap, watching the yard through the glass. I stayed up with him until my eyelids dragged. Around midnight, he told me to get some sleep and that he would wake me if he saw anything. He did not. But someone else woke me instead. I do not know what time it was when the sound dragged me out of sleep. At first, I thought it was a dream, heavy scraping on the porch boards followed by a soft thud against the wall. The old house creaked and shifted in winter, but this was different. It had weight and intent. I slipped out of bed and crept to my window. The glass was fogged at the edges, but I could see the porch roof and the yard beyond. Snowflakes drifted under the glow of the single weak bulb above the door. Something moved at the edge of the light. It stepped just into view, and for a heartbeat I could not understand what I was looking at. It was quadrupedal, low to the ground, with a long, narrow body. Its skin, if that is what it was, looked pale and hairless, stretched tight over two visible ribs and joints. Its head was wrong. Too large, too elongated, with a blunt snout that seemed almost melted. It reminded me of a dog that had been drawn from memory by someone who had only seen one once, briefly, and got the proportions slightly off. It lifted its head toward the door, and I saw its eyes. They did not glow like an animal's in the light. They were dark, flat, almost human in their focus. "Dad," I whispered, too soft for anyone to hear. The thing took a step toward the house. Its movement made my skin crawl. Its legs extended a fraction too far, jointed not quite where a dog should be, as if its bones had been arranged by trial and error. Its paws, if that is what they were long and narrow, leaving indentations in the snow that looked more like elongated hands than prints. It paused near the door, head tilted as if listening. The hallway light snapped on. My father's figure moved fast toward the back of the house. I jerked away from the window, heart hammering. A second later, the porch light flared brighter as he flicked the switch and the door opened a crack. "Who is there?" he called, voice hard. There was a long, terrible moment where nothing happened. Then something clattered against the siding like claws dragging lightly over wood. My father flung the door open wider, rifle raised, and stepped onto the porch. I scrambled back to the window. The yard was empty. Snow lay undisturbed except for a trail of prints leading from the fence line to the porch and back again. My father followed them with the light, jaw clenched. "What is it?" I called, hovering in the hallway. He did not answer. He knelt near one of the prints, running the beam over it. From where I stood, I could see the shape. A long, narrow indentation with a strange drag mark at the back, like something had curled around and dug in. In the morning, he took photos and measured the stride length. He never told me the numbers. The livestock deaths continued sporadically, always near that corner of the property. Always the same 2 clean wounds, the same absence of tracks that made sense. Other farmers in the area started whispering about something out there, but no one had a name for it. They blamed wolves, cougars, bored teenagers. Anything but the idea that something new had moved into the fields. We started locking everything at dusk. Barn doors, tool sheds, even the chicken coop that had been nothing more than a wire fence and a prayer for years. My father strung extra lights along the yard and kept the rifle within reach at all times. One evening over supper, I asked him if he thought it was some kind of dog. My mind kept circling back to Duke, to the empty space he had left. "It is not a dog," my father said quietly. "Dogs do not do that. And they do not look at a house like it is thinking its way inside." There was a silence between us then, heavy and unspoken. We both knew what he meant. Whatever this was, it was not just an animal following instinct. It felt like something trying to learn us. Eventually, the sightings stopped. The mutilations stopped. Winter thawed into a wet, muddy spring, then a short green summer. Life on the farm moved forward with its usual mix of back-breaking work and small joys. We never did get another dog. I left home in my 20s, moved to another province, got a job in a place where the only animals I saw regularly were pigeons and the occasional raccoon. The city noise drowned out the memory of those quiet, tense nights on the farm, for a while. Then during drinks one evening, a co-worker mentioned the old Redgrave farm in Saskatchewan like it was a ghost story. He said people around there used to talk about a weird thing that came around after their dog died, scaring the cattle. He laughed it off, said the place had been empty for years, that no one had lived there with animals in at least a decade. "No dog, no cattle, nothing," he said. "Just an abandoned house. Locals say the stories were all made up." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "No dog?" I asked. "You sure?" "Positive," he said. "My uncle used to hunt near there. Said it had been empty as long as he could remember." I did not argue. I did not tell him that I had buried Duke under the windbreak myself, or that I had watched something that looked almost like him but not quite prowl our porch under a weak yellow light. Maybe memory is the thing that lies. Maybe the land shifts under your feet, rearranging timelines until nothing lines up. Or maybe whatever we had watching us from the fence line all those nights, whatever we called the dog because we had no better word, did not belong to the house at all. Maybe it belonged to the field, to the dark, to the moment when a farm falls silent and no one is left to watch the fence. The first time I heard her name, it was written in red marker on a bathroom stall. Not like a phone number or a crude joke, but like a warning. "Do not ride the elevator alone after 2 a.m. Ask her what happened." Underneath, someone had drawn a shaky little square with doors and a stick figure inside. My name is Josephine, and I went to a university in downtown Toronto where the buildings were older than most of the students. My residence was a 12-story concrete block that someone had tried to make less depressing with potted plants and motivational posters. It had one elevator, and it was ancient. The elevator was the heart of all our ghost stories. In the first week of classes, upper years would gather nervous freshmen in the lobby and tell them about the girl who never made it to her floor. Depending on who was talking, she had fallen, been pushed, or simply vanished somewhere between the 10th and 11th levels. The details changed with every retelling. The ending did not. She was dead, and sometimes the elevator brought her back. I did not believe any of it. I was a city kid. My monsters wore uniforms and carried badges or shouted on street corners. Ghosts in elevators felt like a luxury for people who had not seen real danger yet. But the building itself had a way of grinding down skepticism. The elevator rattled and shuddered whenever it moved. The panel inside still had buttons for floors that no longer existed, labeled with tape and crossed out in black marker after renovations sealed them off. Sometimes it would stop between floors for no reason, lights flickering, doors refusing to open until you hit the alarm button twice and swore under your breath. The first time it happened to me, I was alone, arms full of textbooks, half asleep after an evening class. The car jerked to a halt between the 9th and 10th floors with a metallic groan that made my teeth ache. The light overhead buzzed, dimmed, then came back weaker than before. I sighed, shifted my books, and slammed my thumb on the door open button. Nothing. I hit the alarm. A distant bell chimed, polite and useless. "Come on," I muttered. "Not tonight." The air in the elevator felt suddenly smaller, like someone had turned down an invisible dial that controlled how much space there was between the walls. I took a slow breath, counting in my head. I was not claustrophobic, I told myself that over and over. Then the elevator moved. Not up, not down. It was more like a shiver, a slight sideways lurch that made no mechanical sense. The old cables above us groaned. The light flickered again, and for a heartbeat the car went completely dark. In that moment of blackness, I heard water. It was faint, but unmistakable. The soft rush of it against metal, the echoing drip of it falling onto a hard surface. We were nowhere near the ground floor where the leaking pipes were, but the sound was all around me, as if the elevator shaft had filled with it. The light sputtered back to life. I blinked spots from my vision and realized I was not alone anymore. There was someone standing in the corner opposite me. She was young. Maybe my age, maybe a little younger. Her hair hung in dark, wet ropes around her face, dripping onto the floor. Her clothes were wrong for the season. A faded sweatshirt with an old version of the university logo, jeans that looked a decade out of style, bare feet leaving small puddles where she stood. I had not heard the doors open. I had not heard anyone step in. There was nowhere for her to hide in that car, and yet there she was, as solid and real as my own reflection in the mirrored panel. "Sorry," I said automatically, because that is what you do in Canada when you are trapped in a box with a stranger. You apologize for existing. She did not answer. She just watched me. Her eyes were dark, but not in a dramatic horror movie way. They were dull, exhausted. She looked like someone who had not slept in a long time. "You stuck too?" I tried again, my voice too loud in the small space. "I hit the alarm. Someone will come." She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something I could not hear. Droplets of water slid from the ends of her hair, pattering onto the floor in a rhythm that did not match the faint hum of the building. "They changed it," she said finally. Her voice sounded wrong, like an old recording playing through a cheap speaker. "They moved the floors." I swallowed. "What?" "The rooms," she clarified, "and the hall. My door is gone. Your room number? I asked because my brain was still trying to shove this into some logical box. Which floor are you on? She stepped closer. The air grew colder by a degree that made my breath puff visibly in front of me. She smelled faintly of metal and something else, algae, or old leaves pulled from the bottom of a river. 11, she said. Room 1103. I tried to picture it. I lived on the 8th. My friend Penn had a single on 10. There was no 11th floor. The elevator panel had a button for it once, but it had been covered over with a plastic plate and a handwritten sign, "No access, sealed level." People said that floor had been gutted and turned into storage after a fire. There is no 11, I said slowly. Not anymore. Her expression tightened like someone biting back a sob. They keep saying that, she whispered, but my stuff is still there. The elevator shuddered again. This time the movement felt vertical. The floor seemed to drop half an inch and catch, making my stomach flip. The old emergency light flickered to life above the door, bathing everything in yellow. In that color, her skin looked almost gray. "Can you press my floor?" she asked. Her eyes went to the control panel where the button for 11 should have been. For a split second, I saw it. Not the taped-over dead space I knew, but an actual lit button labeled 11, glowing faintly green like the others. My hand moved on instinct, reached out. The instant my fingertip brushed the plastic, the illusion broke. The plate snapped back into being smooth and solid under my skin. There was no button, just old adhesive residue where something used to be. "I cannot," I said, my voice shaking. "It is not there." She stared at the panel, then at me. A strange kind of understanding crossed her face. Less like she was hearing bad news for the first time and more like she was being forced to accept something she already knew. "They told me I was not supposed to take it on my own," she murmured, "that there had to be someone with me, in case." "In case of what?" I asked before I could stop myself. She looked up toward the ceiling, toward the unseen shaft above us. For a moment I thought I heard that rushing water again, louder now, as if it were pressing just beyond the walls. "In case it did not stop," she said. The elevator jerked. My hand flew to the rail. The car lurched downward, then came to a sudden, bone-jarring halt that sent my books sliding across the floor. The emergency bell rang once, shrill and useless. The girl's expression changed. Relief. That was the only word for it. "This time it stopped," she said softly. "You are lucky." The doors slid open. They should not have. We were still between floors if the numbers on the panel were to be believed. But when the metal panels parted, they revealed a hallway washed in flickering fluorescent light. It was not my floor. The walls were painted a sickly beige I had never seen in the building before. The carpet was an older pattern, threadbare in places, stained in others. Room numbers marched down the corridor in a style that did not match any of the renovated levels. At the far end, a red exit sign buzzed faintly. My stomach dropped. "What floor is this?" She stepped over the threshold without hesitation, watermarks blooming where her feet touched the carpet. She turned once, looking back at me with an expression I could not decode. Something between gratitude and pity. 11, she said. "Finally." "Wait," I blurted. "You cannot just—" The doors slid shut between us with a smooth finality that felt like a hand over my mouth. The elevator hummed, then began to move again, this time with a steadiness it had not shown all night. The panel blinked. 8, 9, 10. By the time it opened again, I was back in the lobby. The security guard looked up from his desk, surprised. "Stuck again?" he asked. "Yeah," I said hoarsely. "Between floors." He shook his head. "This thing is older than sin. At least you were not up near 11. I froze. "There is no 11. He snorted. "There was," he said, "back when I was a first year. They sealed it after an incident. Whole floor shut down. No one is supposed to use that button anymore. I wanted to tell him about the hallway, about the girl, about the way water had seemed to seep out of air that should have been dry. Instead, I walked out into the cold night, my legs unsteady, my ears still straining for the sound of rushing water. Later in the library archives, I found her face in an old yearbook. Same eyes, same tired expression. Her name was printed neatly beneath it, along with her residence and room number. Residence North Hall, room 1103. They can seal a floor, they can tape over buttons, paint over doors, change carpets and wiring and fire codes. But elevators remember. They remember every floor they ever stopped on and everyone they ever carried. And sometimes when the building is old and the hour is late and you are foolish enough to ride alone, they try to finish one last trip. My name is Frederick, and the last time I saw my brother, he was barefoot in the snow, smiling like he had finally won an argument none of us understood. We grew up in a small town in Manitoba where winter was not a season so much as a personality. It got into everything. It warped doors, cracked pavement, and crawled into your lungs. People there measured their lives in storms, before the blizzard of '09, after the ice storm that took out the power for a week. The night my brother disappeared became one of those markers. His name is Aaron. I say is, not was, because no one ever found a body. That technicality is the only thing that keeps part of my brain from accepting what the rest of me already knows. Aaron was 3 years older than me and had always been the one who pushed boundaries. Stayed out later, drove faster, tested how thin the ice was on the river. When he started to slip in ways we did not have words for yet, it looked at first like more of the same. He stopped sleeping. He jumped at sounds no one else heard. Some days he would talk a mile a minute, full of big plans. Other days he would sit at the kitchen table staring out the window for hours, fingers tapping out a frantic, rhythmic beat. My parents called it stress. They said it was just a phase or too much drinking, too much weed. Around town, people used words like unstable and troubled in the same tone they used for bad weather. Something you endured, something you waited out. The truth is, he needed help. Real help. Appointments with professionals were made and missed. Wait lists were months long. In a place where there were more churches than clinics, prayer was easier to find than treatment. The week he vanished, a blizzard had been crawling across the province, swallowing highways and closing schools one town at a time. By the time it reached us, the sky had turned the color of dirty wool and the air had that particular sharp smell it gets when snow is coming. The radio said to stay inside unless it was an emergency. Inside did not feel safe. Aaron was pacing the living room, leaving tracks in the thin layer of slush his boots had shed. He kept pulling the curtain back from the front window and peering out into the thickening white. "They are coming tonight," he said. "For what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "To collect," he said. "To balance things out." My mother stood at the stove, stirring a pot of soup like she could make the house warmer by sheer force of will. She shot me a look over her shoulder, the one that meant don't push him. "Not now." "Who is they, man?" I asked anyway, because I did not know how not to. He tore his gaze from the snow and looked at me like I had asked the stupidest question in the world. "You know," he said. "You have heard them too." "I have not," I said, gently. He laughed then, a short, sharp bark of sound that made the hair on my arm stand up. "You will," he said, "when they are closer." That night, the storm hit in full. Wind howled around the corners of the house, shaking the old windows in their frames. Snow slapped against the glass so hard it sounded like someone throwing handfuls of sand. The streetlights outside disappeared into a swirling gray wall. We lost power around 9. The house sighed into darkness, broken only by the orange flicker of candles and the faint green glow of the battery-powered radio on the counter. The announcer's voice crackled in and out, listing road closures and warnings. My father went to check on the generator in the shed and came back swearing under his breath. The starter was frozen. "We will be fine," he said anyway. "Blankets, candles, we have done this before." The problem was that this time, we had not done it with Aaron like this. He would not sit still. He paced from room to room, pausing at every window, pressing his palm against the cold glass as if testing it for weakness. At one point, he opened the back door a crack and just stood there, letting the wind blow snow into the kitchen. "Aaron, shut it," my mother snapped, fear bleeding through her irritation. "You are letting the heat out." "They are closer when it is quiet," he murmured. "Listen." All I heard was the roar of the wind and the occasional crack of a branch snapping under the weight of ice. At some point after midnight, exhaustion pulled me under. I fell asleep on the couch under a heavy quilt, the radio's static buzz merging with the sound of the storm. When I woke, the house felt wrong. Too still. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax. The radio was silent. Light seeped into the living room, thin and gray, outlining the furniture in soft shadows. The storm had eased into a steady, whispering snowfall. My parents were in the kitchen, voices low and strained. "He was on the chair when I fell asleep," my mother was saying. "Right there." I woke up and the door was open and he was gone. My father's answer was a rough whisper. "Boots? Still by the mat." I sat up too fast, the room tilting for a second. "What is going on?" They both turned toward me, and in their faces I saw the confirmation of the dread already coiling in my stomach. The back door stood slightly ajar, snow blown in across the linoleum in a thin, uneven line. "Aaron went out," my father said, "without his boots, without his coat." The world narrowed to that one impossible fact. The thermometer outside the window read -23. The wind chill made it worse. No one walked out into that without gear and came back fine. We called his cell. It went straight to voicemail. We checked his room, the basement, the garage, even though we knew the door told the story. Bare footprints pressed into the thin layer of snow on the porch leading outward. The footprint trail did not last long. We followed it as far as we could, my father and I, bundled in every layer we owned. The prints went from the porch to the yard and then toward the stand of trees at the edge of our property. After 10 meters, they blurred. After 20, they were gone, swallowed by fresh snow and the directionless gusts of wind that still clawed at the open spaces. "Maybe he turned back," I said, my voice muffled by my scarf. "Maybe he came around the other side." My father shook his head once sharply. "Go back inside," he said. "Call 911. The search started fast. RCMP, local volunteers, search and rescue teams with dogs and snowmobiles. Our town did not get a lot of excitement. When someone went missing in a storm, people came out. They formed lines and swept through the fields, their bright jackets like moving bruises against the white. They combed the tree line, the ditches, the riverbank. They found nothing. No body, no scraps of clothing, no blood. No sign that Aaron had laid down in the snow and let the cold take him, which everyone agreed was the most likely outcome. The official term was presumed hypothermia-related death. The unofficial term, whispered when they thought my parents could not hear, was suicide. The thing is, you expect a body. Even when the rational part of you knows the snow can hide a lot, that drifts can cover tracks and evidence, some stubborn, primal part of your brain wants the physical proof. A place to point to and say, "Here, this is where it stopped." We never got that. What we got instead were sightings. The first one came 6 months later in June. A trucker claimed he had picked up a hitchhiker on the highway a few towns over. The kid was thin, barefoot, wearing clothes that did not match the weather. He said the kid's name was Aaron. Said he talked about walking out of a storm and never quite finding his way back. When the trucker pulled into a rest stop to get coffee, the kid was gone. People make things up, my father said when the RCMP passed the story along. His voice shook anyway. Then came another call from a woman who worked nights at a gas station 2 hours north. She said a young man had come in without shoes in the dead of winter, hands red and raw, asking if he could use the phone to call his brother. She remembered the name he gave for the brother because it matched mine. By the time she found a pen to write it down, he was gone too, swallowed into the dark stretch of highway outside. Stories like that trickled in over the years, never enough to form a solid picture, always enough to keep hope alive in a cruel, flickering way. A kid matching his description seen near a truck stop in another province. A barefoot man walking along the edge of a frozen lake at dawn. A figure on a grainy security camera tape slipping past the edge of the frame. Each time, my mother would sit at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand long after the call ended, knuckles white, eyes fixed on some point far beyond the wall. My father would pretend to be angry about the false hope, but I could hear him at night quietly opening the back door, stepping onto the porch like he might see footprints there again. I moved away eventually. You can only live inside an unfinished story for so long before it starts to eat you. I told myself I was leaving to build my own life, to avoid being pulled into the gravity well of a single frozen night. The truth is, part of me left because I was tired of looking into every crowd and thinking I saw him. The calls slowed, then stopped. Years piled up. My parents got older. Their faces folded in on themselves in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with standing in doorways looking for someone who never walked back through. Then last winter I got a voicemail from an unknown number. No message on the transcript, just 30 seconds of static. I almost deleted it without listening. Almost. When I pressed play, at first all I heard was that fuzzy hiss like the radio during storms when we were kids. Underneath it faintly there was another sound, the low rush of wind or maybe distant traffic, and then right at the edge of hearing, a voice. It said my name, the way only Aaron ever did, stretching the first syllable into a teasing drawl. "Freddie," it said, barely a breath buried under the static. "You coming?" My hand shook. I replayed it again and again, headphones pressed tight to my ears, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. A wrong number. A glitch. My brain filling gaps with a familiar ghost. The number was disconnected when I tried to call back. Of course it was. I did not tell my parents about the voicemail. I could not put that look back in their eyes. People ask gently if I think he is still alive. I give them the answer that makes sense on paper. No coat, no boots. Temperatures that kill in minutes. A search that found nothing. But in the quiet hours, when the world outside my apartment window is muffled under fresh snow and the wind rattles the glass just so, I remember the way he smiled that last night, standing barefoot in the yard with the storm clawing at him, like he had finally found something that made sense. He said they were coming, that he had to meet them halfway. Sometimes I wonder if there are places where the world thins out in a blizzard, if some people step into that white and keep walking long after the rest of us would have fallen. And sometimes when my phone buzzes with an unknown number, there is a part of me that still expects to hear his voice on the other end, asking why it took me so long to follow. The first time I watched the footage, I almost believed the comments. Mute the sound, shrink the screen, and it looks almost ordinary. Just a late-night shift at a downtown convenience store in Vancouver. A woman behind the counter. A man buying cigarettes. A brief scuffle that might be a robbery gone wrong. If you did not know me, if you had never stood where I stood, you might scroll past thinking, it does not look that bad. My name is Elodie and I am the woman in that video." The store sat on the corner of a busy intersection that went quiet only after 2 a.m. By then the buses came less often, the drunks wandered home, and the only people who stepped through the door were regulars, stragglers, and the kind of customers you'd learn to watch without appearing to watch. We had cameras everywhere, over the counter, by the door, near the coolers. The owner called them our extra employees. "They see everything," he liked to say. They did not. That night I was alone on shift, which was not unusual. It was a weekday, rain slicking the sidewalks outside, streetlights turning every puddle into a shimmering orange coin. I had my routine: sweep the floor, restock the front shelves, scroll my phone between customers while an old radio played quietly behind the counter. Around 1:40 a.m. he walked in. If you pause the video at that moment, he looks like the safest man in the world. Clean-shaven, neatly dressed in a dark coat, no visible tattoos, no hood, no swagger. I remember the smell of his cologne, something sharp and expensive that did not match our usual clientele. He moved with a quiet confidence that read, at first, like good manners. "Evening," he said, placing a pack of gum and a bottle of water on the counter. "Slow night?" His voice was calm, educated, the kind you hear in corporate training videos. "Pretty much," I replied. Small talk, weather, late hours, the kind of conversations that dissolve as soon as the door chimes. He asked how long I had worked there. I told him. He laughed at one of my jokes. "In the footage you can see me smile. That detail will later be used against me by strangers online. If you knew what to look for, you might notice how often he glanced up at the cameras. Not nervously, not like he was afraid of being caught, more like he was taking inventory. His gaze ticked from the dome over the entrance to the one above the candy aisle, then to the blind spot near the office door that every employee eventually learned to avoid. "You must feel safe with all these eyes on you," he said lightly. "I guess," I answered. "Better than nothing." He tapped his card, the machine beeped, and on the video he turns as if to leave. One step toward the door, hand in his coat pocket. Then he stops. He looks back at me and smiles. In the footage, it is a quick, almost charming expression, the kind you might give when you remember you forgot to ask something. I can tell you that in person, that smile slid over me like cold water. "Hey, can I ask you a favor?" he said. This part has no audio in the clip that got shared around. The store cameras recorded video only. The microphone was behind the counter on a different system, and that file never made it online. So when people watched the muted footage, all they saw was him lean forward, elbows on the counter, his body language friendly, almost intimate. He said his car would not start, that his phone was dead, that he was supposed to pick up his wife from the hospital after a shift and he was already late. He asked if he could use the outlet behind the counter just for 5 minutes to charge his phone. He had his own cable, see? He held it up like a peace offering. I hesitated. Company policy was clear: no customers behind the counter, ever. But it was raining hard. I thought of some woman in scrubs standing under a bus shelter waiting for someone who was not coming. I thought of how many times I had asked strangers for small kindnesses in this city and how many had said yes. "Just stay where I can see you," I said finally, stepping aside. In the footage, you see me move out of frame for a second, grabbing my keys from the drawer to unlock the little gate that separated the customer area from the employee's space. The camera above the counter catches only the top of his head as he ducks under the half door. He moves smoothly like he has done this before. He plugs his phone in. It lights up, the screen briefly visible on camera, too blurred to read. He thanks me again, voice soft. "You are very kind," he says. "Most people are not anymore." We stand there for a moment, the two of us behind the counter. From the camera's perspective, it looks almost like we are co-workers. colleagues sharing a joke. The internet froze that frame and turned it into a dozen different narratives. Here is what you do not see. You do not see the moment his tone changes, the way his words flatten. You do not see his hand sliding into his coat pocket again, fingers closing around something that is not a charging cable. "You lock up alone, right?" he asks. I frown. "Excuse me?" "You are safe here," he says almost kindly. "With all these cameras." His hand comes out of his coat. There is metal in it, not a gun. A short dark object with a glinting end, later identified as a modified tool, something between a punch and a blade. He knows exactly where to stand so that his body blocks the view of it from the main camera. On the footage, you see me stiffen, shoulders drawing back. You see my mouth open. The angle does not capture my eyes, but I remember how they locked on the thing in his hand, then on the door, calculating distances. "Do not scream," he says. "We are in the blind spot." He is right. There is a narrow triangle of space between the counter, the office door, and the shelf of lottery tickets where the overhead cameras overlap imperfectly. A dead zone. We usually used it to scratch an itch or adjust a shirt when we thought no one was watching. He uses it for something else. On the video, you can see only fragments, a jerk of movement. My arm yanked backward, the top of his head as he leans in, my face turning away from the camera. Later in court, his lawyer will pause the footage at these moments and say, "You cannot actually see what he is doing, can you? It could be anything." I can tell you exactly what it was. He pressed the tool against my ribs hard enough to hurt, not hard enough to pierce. He told me he knew how long it would take for someone to respond if I hit the panic button. He listed the number of times I had done it before for drunk kids and shoplifters, his voice low and steady. "You work Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays," he murmured. "You take the bus home, the 14. You get off at Elm, 3rd stop." He should not have known that. My vision narrowed. I tasted iron. The world became the point of pressure against my side and the cold breath at my ear. "Come with me," he said. "We will take a little walk to the back." In the footage, you see me move. Clumsy, off balance. To some viewers, it looks like I might be going willingly. They paused that frame too in online discussions. They drew little arrows. What the cameras did not capture were my knees shaking, the way his fingers dug into the soft flesh of my upper arm hard enough to leave bruises shaped like parentheses. They did not record the way he described in calm detail what would happen if I fought. I will spare you the specifics of what happened in that blind pocket of space and in the narrow corridor behind the office door. The corridor had no camera. The owner had never seen the point. I will tell you that it ended because of something small. Irregular, a guy we all knew by face, if not by name, showed up earlier than usual, yanked the locked door, and saw me pinned in the back hallway through the glass reflection. He started pounding on the door, shouting. That sound startled my attacker just enough. His grip slipped for half a heartbeat. I ran. In the footage, you see me burst back into frame, scrambling for the door controls, slapping the emergency release. You see him appear a second later, coat straightened, expression composed, slipping out past the regular with an apologetic gesture, like he is just some guy who happened to be in the way. The police arrested him weeks later for assaulting another clerk in a different neighborhood. The pattern was the same. Late night, lone woman, cameras angled just a little wrong. When my case went public, the store released the footage to the news. From there, it hit social media, stripped of context and sound. People watched and commented with the casual cruelty of distance. "Looks like he just grabbed her arm. She is overreacting. I have seen worse in bar fights. If it was that bad, why does she look so calm? As if fear always looks like screaming. As if cameras cannot miss the moments that matter most." Sometimes I think about the other women who never got as far as a panicked regular at the door. The ones whose videos, if they exist, look not that bad when scrubbed of sound and framed badly. How many stories were dismissed because a lens blinked at the wrong second? People tell me I am lucky the cameras were there at all. Without them, maybe he never would have been caught. Maybe. But on the worst nights when I wake up with the pressure of an invisible hand at my ribs, I remember how he smiled at the black domes in the ceiling and said they saw everything. And I remember standing in a courtroom watching my own fear turned into pixels and angles, listening to strangers debate whether what happened to me was real enough, visible enough, bad enough. The cameras did not see everything. They never do.